Tonight we're going to talk about data. I know, not the most exciting topic, but it's really important. And I'll even have a chance to talk about DNA weapons at the end, so there's that. Anyway, I've noticed quite a few stories about massive data centers being built to power this new world, and I had some questions. So here's what I came up with. First of all, if you're trying to build a technocratic society, then data runs the world, obviously. But the implications are pretty crazy. We all kind of go through life with the understanding that everything we do in the digital space is being scooped up by both corporations and governments. But we rarely, if ever, think about what's actually being done with that data. Nor do many people contemplate how it could be used against them. Typically, people just conclude that it's for, marketing campaigns and consumerism, but there's a much darker reality at play. Basically, they're harvesting you. Every click, every keystroke, every step you take, every app you tap, and every whispered voice command, all collected and sold. But it's not really just data, it's more of a dossier on you. And even though it's comprised of your intimate details, you don't own it. It's theirs now, fed into a machine that never sleeps to create a sort of digital shadow. It's often described as a reflection of who you are in the real world. Your habits, your fears, and even those, dare I say, questionable late-night searches, all stitched together into a profile so complete it knows you better than you know yourself. This is actually at the core of Yuval Harari's Hacking Humans argument. When in the hands of the government, well, they don't need to guess your next move, they already mapped it, fed it through predictive AI, and with near certainty, they already know what you're going to do next. But it's not only about predicting behavior. When they decide to tighten those strings, that data doesn't just define you, it owns you. However, we should back up and ask ourselves, what is technocracy to begin with? And for that, let's jump over to Jesse Smith. Now, you can find all the articles that I'm going to talk about in the pinned comment. And I quote, "Technocracy can be defined as an impersonal and scientific method of managing all aspects of a society. Its primary concerns deal with how energy is produced and used." Sounds familiar.
All environmental scare tactics. The environmentalists, the left actually, not environmentalists, groups on the left, understood that if you can control energy, you can control human beings. And that's what it was all about.
But it does go much deeper than that. One of the best explanations dates back to 1937, where it states that technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. For the first time in human history, it's going to be done as a scientific and engineering problem. There will be no place for politics or politicians, finance or financiers, rackets or racketeers. The technocratic dream is revolutionary in scope, envisioning a total reorganization of industry, government, and law. Now, when they say they want to socially engineer all of society, they mean it. Hell, even the US Constitution to them is viewed as a relic, completely unfit to serve as a basis of governance and human rights. So, in other words, they're delusional. But it's true. Technocrats make no pretense about maintaining a representative form of government, be it a republic or a democracy. Its goal is to establish a scientific dictatorship. Technocrats have been highly critical of fascists, communists, socialists, and really every other political movement. But they don't seem to have a problem with their own totalitarian style of rule, termed a technate. Regardless of one's comprehension of their plan, a monumental reshaping of governments, economies, and societies is occurring right now. But not by elected representatives, constitutions, creeds, or the will of the people. Power is now concentrated in the hands of an exclusive class of scientists, technologists, engineers, and technicians, many of whom also happen to head multi-billion-dollar corporations. And that's exactly why Klaus Schwab and the WEF promote his ideology of public-private partnerships, merging the public sector, the government, with the private sector, corporations. Yeah, a form of fascism by definition. And it's too bad that words don't really mean anything anymore. Because it'd be great for all the people screaming about fascism every day to actually recognize when it's staring them in the face. Anyway, there is no better example of technocracy than Silicon Valley. They're now intimately woven into all aspects of governance and business. And this right here is a problem that we have to worry about on both sides of the aisle. Political tribalism has no role here. Anyway, stay on your toes because, as they say, technocrats are content with using politicians and the political system as a whole to quietly transform the government into a full-fledged technate from the inside out or vice versa. There's another big problem here too. Our entire world is being remade to accommodate this technocratic vision. Big tech products are ubiquitous and thought to be indispensable to our ultra-modern, future-oriented world. AI, robotics, the Internet of Things are touted as catalysts that can lead to a future of ease and prosperity for all. Yeah, if you believe their utopian sales pitch, which I don't. But it's all about the fourth industrial revolution, which we talked about last time. However, there is one major caveat. This quote-unquote revolution has the potential to overtake humanity itself and render humans as hackable animals and useless people. In fact, some say that's their explicit goal. And I'm one of those people, to be honest.
I mean, previously in history, if you were on the wrong side of history, if you didn't understand what was happening and you lost the competition, then you ended up as some kind of serf or manual laborer being exploited by the people who understand and have the power. Now, if you're left behind, you're facing something far worse, which is to be completely irrelevant. They won't even need you as a serf or as a slave.
You know, it's always interesting to see how each pillar to this agenda bleeds into all the others. It's all connected. Here's what I mean. This sort of political system ties perfectly into their insane plan for population control. For example, a quote from Yuval Harari.
And now fast forward to the early 21st century when we just don't need the vast majority of the population.
Because
the future is about developing more and more sophisticated technology, like, again, artificial intelligence, bioengineering. Most people don't contribute anything to that, except perhaps for their data. And whatever people are still doing, which is useful, these technologies increasingly will make redundant and will make it possible to replace the people.
Now fast forward to the 21st century, where we just don't need the vast majority of the population. Most people don't contribute anything to that, except perhaps their data. And whatever people are still doing, which is useful, well, this technology increasingly will make it redundant. And it's going to make it possible to replace the people entirely. End of quote. And then we even have Larry Fink, who claims that massive population declines in modernized societies will be beneficial because it's going to speed up automation.
If you forecast out the transformation that we're going to see across all societies because of AI, robotics, sensor technology, the speed in which this change is going to occur, I could argue in the developed countries, the big winners are countries that have shrinking populations. Okay, that's something that most people never talked about. You know, we always used to think shrinking population is a cause for negative growth. But in my conversations with the leadership of these large developed countries that have xenophobic immigration policies, they don't allow anybody to come in, shrinking unemployment, shrinking demographics, these countries will rapidly develop robotics and AI and technology.
Yeah, essentially replacing humans with machines to the point that the entire job market collapses. And they say that's a great thing. But why would they say that? Well, that's when they're going to come out with universal basic income. But here's the thing, it's not really going to be universal. It's going to be entirely dependent upon obedience to the regime. If you're a good peasant, you'll get access to resources. And if you're not, well then you're going to get cut off with the push of a button, relegated to the margins of society, excluded. So what's the point, or the end goal? Well, ever since its inception way back in the 1930s, it's always been about control. And I quote, "By adopting technocracy, the banking elite not only can retain control over the monetary system, they will also cement their rule over all industries, natural resources, governments, institutions, and most importantly, the people." When it comes to this technocratic scheme, just remember, it's always incremental, the long game. However, we find ourselves at some inflection point right now, as technology finally caught up to their tyrannical ambitions, and now they see their opening for implementation. But how do they do it? Well, as I said in the beginning, the foundation to everything hinges on data. So I had to ask myself a couple questions. First, how do we become accustomed to this data theft? And second, regarding data harvesting, what are some methods that governments, corporations, and these shadow groups use to vacuum up every scrap of our existence? As it turns out, they use mundane and systemic methods that are already happening in the background to your daily life. Now, I was surprised by how much of this stuff was new to me, so if you have anything to add, just put it in a comment. Anyway, first up we have passive tracking, the silent stalkers per se. So every website you visit leaves crumbs, and besides cookies, this includes something called tracking pixels. This is commonly referred to as spy pixels. It logs your IP address, location data, demographic info, device info, your preferences. They log your every click, and can even tell how long you linger on a certain screen. Establishing a pattern of user behavior is a key component. From there, we've got third-party advertising networks such as Google's DoubleClick or Meta's AdTech. So these networks take those crumbs from cookies and spy pixels and stitch them all together into a sprawling map of your online life. And then we have device fingerprinting. Yeah, even if you clear cookies, your device still betrays you. Unique combos of browser version, screen resolution, and your IP address create a sort of digital ID that's tough to shake. So governments and firms use that to tag you across all platforms without your consent. And then of course you have app permissions, of which most people overlook. Even the weather app takes your location information, pinging it 24/7, and then sells it to data brokers. So they bundle it and sell it to anybody with the cash, and that includes state actors. But let's get into active collection. Now that simply means that you hand over the information quote-unquote willingly. Now I say that with quotes because look, it's uninformed consent. People don't read the user agreements or anything like that, they just skip to the bottom and accept. But this category includes everything on social media, every post, like, comment, or rant posted. It's a goldmine. Algorithms scrape your words, hashtags, or whatever, and connections, pair it with the metadata, which includes time, location, device you're using, and they use it to fill in the blanks. And once they do that, they basically have a timeline of your entire day. The crazy part is governments can subpoena that data, or they can just buy it from a data broker and they don't need a warrant. Have you ever filled out an online survey? Well, great, then everyone has your name, age, income, and habits, all funneled into a database that cross-references everything with terrifying precision. Have you ever wondered how they know that you were talking to your brother about buying a new car? Well, this is how, and I use that example because it happened to me recently. I mean, hell, even your voice assistant like Siri, Alexa, Google Home, well, they aren't just listening from when you say their name as the activation, alright? All background chatter gets scooped up, analyzed, and stored. Some leaks have indicated that Amazon's quote-unquote accidental recordings, as they call it, show you how your offhand shit-talking becomes fodder for their datasets. These quote-unquote accidental recordings have even been used in a murder case, if I remember correctly. Now, the data broker ecosystem is especially nefarious. Companies like Axicom or Experian buy scraps from apps, retailers, and they even use public records, and they mash them up into a profile. Income, voting history, medical records, all of it's included. In fact, if we jump over to Sociable real quick, US spy agencies are looking for cheaper and quicker ways to access and buy your data from private companies. This came from a 2022 report from the DNI. And yeah, we got a taste of how Uncle Sam was buying data from commercial vendors that it would otherwise need a warrant to acquire. But if they buy it from a private company, they don't need that. And on top of that, there's even something called dark pool trading on data. This includes data that's too sensitive for public sale. So imagine geolocation tags near military bases. Yeah, stuff like that. It's all traded quietly within the public sector, no paper trail and no oversight. But from here, we have to talk about the invisible net and surveillance networks. So you have ISP monitoring. Your internet provider sees every site and every file downloaded. Now, there are certain laws that allow governments to tap into that for national security purposes, or so they say, and no notice is required. Now from here, we can even talk about mobile tower triangulation, as your cell phone pings cell towers constantly. Cell phone carriers and their government pals can track your movement down to a few meters, essentially building a heat map of your entire life. They even use this method called geofencing at protests, and this has been happening for years at this point. The invisible net includes traffic cameras, and in the future, the Internet of Things will be included too. Smart cities mean smart surveillance. License plates, facial recognition, and all smart connected devices feed real-time data into a centralized system. China's social credit system is currently the poster child. And so in that vein, I have to quickly mention biometric harvesting, something that we're going to have to contend with in the years to come. And again, we have facial recognition. Airports, new stores, and street cameras will scan your face, tie it to your identity via DMV records, probably. And they'll even connect it to all your family photos on Facebook. I mean, hell, there's a company called Clearview AI, and they have a database. And it's a collection of all of your selfies. Yeah, that's happening right now. However, we can't forget about the DNA databases like Ancestry.com and 23andMe. They've already been hacked before, and might even sell your genetic code to the largest bidder. However, police already use this to ID suspects today. I'm pretty sure that's how they caught a serial killer in California. One family member submits their DNA to a place like that, and, well, your entire lineage is profiled, bundled, and sold. They're even wading into the waters of surveilling your walking gait and voice print. All of this is creating the perfect situation for digital control. Of course, all of that data is meant to be tied to your digital ID, but I talk about that all the time, so we're going to skip it. The main sticking point is that they don't just collect, they correlate. Algorithms link your Amazon purchase to your social media rant and then tie that to your GPS trail. And what's the result? Well, it culminates in a profile that knows where you've been, what you want, who you hate, and how to nudge or crush you. It's a social engineer's paradise. And of course, governments can then use that for control, obviously. Imagine a world where they can freeze your bank account if your risk score spikes, throttle your connection if you dissent, or limit your reach on social media. But here's one that's not often talked about. But with all that information about you, they could even flood you with propaganda tailored to your specific fears. Now, China's social credit system already blocks train access over bad behavior, and they ridicule people on news programs for jaywalking.
Everywhere she goes, Ouyang Haoyu is followed. What she buys, how she behaves, is tracked and scored to show how responsible and trustworthy she is. It's called the social credit system, and in one version now being tested, a person's reputation is scored on a scale of 350 to 950. And Haoyu, with a good score of 752, is okay with it. In fact, most people are.
It's a mechanism like pushes you to become a better citizen.
It's big data meets Big Brother, expanding how the government monitors, understands, and ultimately controls its 1.4 billion citizens.
这个是针对
Thanks to advances in artificial intelligence and facial recognition, and a web of more than 200 million surveillance cameras.
Are people bothered by privacy concerns?
We think the lot of camera keep the safety is really good. We can accept it.
Companies are experimenting with the algorithms to help the government create the new national social credit system. The government also has pilot projects. In one, citizens are required to do hours of unpaid work to get benefits. And scores are docked for things like littering, a messy yard, gossip, even jaywalking. Video of offenders is shown on the local news.
But the West isn't that far behind with their Palantir pre-crime models either. It's not even adequate to call it Big Brother. It's a hydra of systems, a leviathan of control and oppression, made up of both public and private entities. And the real crazy part is that you already opted in by simply being alive in 2025. Now, if you want to collect and use data from billions of people around the world, it creates a sort of logistical problem. And to remedy that, they need to create massive data centers everywhere. I was reminded of this article from Tim Hinchliffe. Embedded within their scheme for monetizing nature lies a land grab, tying it to their initiative to end private land ownership and to switch to lab-grown food. One of the main reasons for this tyrannical move is because the massive data centers need easy access to water and energy. And well, farms fit the bill. As a result, they want to force farmers out, scoop up that land and build said data centers on prime agricultural land. Again, do you notice how all these initiatives intersect? So yeah, they are going after farms simply because of the adage, control the food, control the people. They also need the land for their AI data centers. Control the food, control the people. Control the data, control the people. All in one. Yeah, not great. You know, Klaus Schwab has even talked about building a digital brain to store all of this data.
I just would like to highlight what you said about the European Chips Act, because it's a very important step to create the physical brain for digitalization and to have it located to a certain extent in Europe.
As Klaus Schwab says, the intelligent age is dependent upon this data, your data. And as a result, I have a bunch of crazy stories about new data centers being built. So did you guys know that 3 Mile Island was purchased by Microsoft to turn it into a nuclear-powered data hub, all to power their artificial intelligence? Yeah, it's true. The infamous nuclear relic, once a poster child for meltdown mayhem, is in fact being resurrected. But not by some benevolent savior, but instead by the cold, calculated hand of big tech. Microsoft signed the deal for it in September 2024, and by 2028, they expected to pump out 835 megawatts of nuclear juice to power their AI systems. It's going to cost about $1.6 billion to rebuild, with whispers of a public-private partnership with the US government to boot, and supposedly, it's a 20-year deal. It's not just Microsoft either. All of these tech overlords are on a buying spree, sniffing out dead nuclear husks and breathing life back into them to power their digital empires. Amazon bought out the Talon energy plant for $650 million. Bill Gates has a different pet project called TerraPower, set to be built in Wyoming to the tune of $1 billion. In Sweden, they're building a nuclear campus made of many small modular reactors, with the backing by the Swedish government as well. And it's all to power their artificial intelligence and data collection. From there, we have the UK, who is trying to change an old car manufacturing facility into a nuclear-powered data center too. And then we have France, who is already a juggernaut in this space, considering 70% of their power comes from nuclear. But they're getting ready to launch one specifically for data too. Canada's doing it with the Ontario Power Generation Company, I believe, and are trying to coax big tech into investing there with rumors of Microsoft and Meta being involved. And we can't forget about China, who's building Linglong 1. It's billed as something for industrial use, but don't be fooled. China's tech giants and their insatiable need for data dwarf most nations' entire grid already. Now, I do have some honorable mentions. The state of Texas wants to build the equivalent of 30 nuclear reactors by 2030 to power exclusively AI data centers. And then we have Exxon, who wants to build an exclusive power grid not for consumer homes or businesses or even factories. They want to build an entirely separate power grid specifically for artificial intelligence. You know what's interesting? The Agenda 2030 people have backed themselves into yet another corner. They tell you energy production is an evil of the world, destroying ecosystems and the planet as a whole. However, to power their technocratic agenda, well, they can't use solar or wind, alright? It just doesn't work. So eventually, this is going to blow up in their faces and prove once again that none of this is to save the planet. Because of course, they'll revert back to their old ways, give up the messaging and choose to power their artificial intelligence over the virtue signaling. It's going to reveal that none of this is based on principle. It's all a manipulation to gain power over the masses. These aren't isolated experiments either. They're harbingers. Nuclear is back, but not as a public savior, but as a private weapon for tech's endless appetite. We're at the beginning of a globe-spanning web of atomic ambition, and each site is going to be a node in a system that's less about progress and more about control. However, we can't stop there, because we still have to talk about Larry Ellison. So in the last video, we talked about his appearance at the World Government Summit. He was pitching the creation of a global health database that includes genetic information. And this right here is a part of a much, much darker scheme, the dangers of which are quite chilling. Now the buzz at places like the World Government Summit and Davos about a global health database sounds like a technocrat's dream. Every heartbeat, every genome, every sniffle, all neatly cataloged in one sprawling digital vault. But beneath that shiny promise of better healthcare lurks a Pandora's box of dangers, from suffocating surveillance to foreign powers turning your DNA into a weapon. A centralized health database isn't just a medical ledger, it's a surveillance goldmine. Biometric data like your DNA, iris scans from your eyes, or even gait patterns isn't abstract, it's you, distilled into code. Once it's all in one place, governments or corporations can track you with surgical precision. Imagine a system that knows you're predisposed to anxiety, and then it cross-references and knows what you pick up at the pharmacy, ties that to your social media rant and your GPS trail, and they flag you as a dissenter. But it's not a stretch. China's already doing this with its social credit system, where biometric data helps pin down Uyghurs for quote-unquote re-education. A global database could just scale that up, turning your health into a leash for control freaks around the world. And if it's hacked, well then your most intimate vulnerabilities from your mental health or genetics becomes blackmail fodder for anyone with a server and a grudge. Now let's talk about foreign governments. A centralized trove of everyone's health data isn't just a privacy nightmare, it's a geopolitical weapon waiting to be used. If a rival nation gets its hands on that, theoretically they could exploit population-wide weaknesses. Imagine tailored cyber attacks that spike insulin pumps in diabetic-heavy regions. Or it could just be propaganda, laser targeted at people with specific mental health conditions. The US intelligence community is already a little bit twitchy about it. Back in 2021, they warned that China's hoarding of American genomic data could outpace US biotech and tilt global power. Why? Well, because health data isn't just personal. It's a map of a nation's soft spots, ripe for exploitation. And here's where it gets downright ghoulish: DNA weapons. These aren't just sci-fi stories anymore. Picture a pathogen engineered to zero in on specific genetic markers. Say a virus that only kills people with a certain ancestry. A global database hands the blueprint to any state or rogue actor with the tech to pull it off. And I'm going to use China as my example once again. And the reason is because they've built the world's largest DNA database, 80 million profiles and counting. Partly through forced collection from Uyghurs and shady deals with foreign biotech firms like BGI. US officials have already flagged BGI for funneling genetic data to the Chinese military, with whispers of bioweapons research bubbling up since at least 2020. We even have articles like this one from the Washington Times. who suggest that Beijing's tinkering with germ weapons to hit ethnic groups. A claim their defenders scoff at, but the evidence keeps piling up. If they crack this, a global health database could be their shopping list for targeting entire populations, or sparing their own. You know, the stakes climb even higher when you factor in precision medicine gone rogue. A centralized database could let foes not just surveil people or make them sick, but edit humanity as a whole. You know, CRISPR is already here, tweaking genes like it's a video game. Hand that tech to a hostile power with everyone's DNA on file, and you have a recipe for, I don't know, silent genocide, I guess. Or perhaps forced evolution. And China is not shy about its biotech ambitions. They talk about it openly. Their precision medicine initiative dwarfs the US's, and they're pairing it with artificial intelligence to crunch genetic data at scale. If you add in a global database, well, the line between healthcare and warfare starts to blur. But here's the kicker, this is not hypothetical. China's already been caught hacking US health companies. In 2015, they hacked Anthem, and they got 80 million records out of it. And offering COVID labs to states in 2020, well, that's just a Trojan horse for more DNA. Meanwhile, the Davos types push this one database idea like it's utopia, ignoring how these systems actually run and how vulnerable they actually are. The US cannot even shield its own data. Remember the 2019 Department of Homeland Security breach? Well, they got 200,000 face scans out of that. And this idea of a global vault would be the target of every hacker, spy, and dictator with a chip on their shoulder. So, the dangers? Well, you have surveillance that makes Orwell blush, foreign foes mapping your weaknesses, and DNA weapons that could rewrite humanity's endgame, all fueled by a database sold as progress. You know, DNA weapons are the stuff of nightmares. It's a future where your bloodline could be your death sentence, and the architects of this doom don't need bombs, just a vial and a grudge. No one's out there parading proof in the streets, but the signs are there. Biotech giants are tying themselves to the military, vast DNA data banks, and they have a hunger for dominance that doesn't bend to ethics. The danger isn't in the details we can't see, it's in the intent that we can see. A global health database like the ones that Davos talks about offers these shadowy hands the raw material, your genetic map, ripe for targeting. So by now the picture's clear, your data is not yours, it's theirs, a currency for control, hoarded in nuclear-fueled vaults and poised to turn your genes into a kill switch. With each day, the leash tightens, every step tracked, every breath weaponized, but it's not over. Awareness is the first fracture in their machine. This stuff is not fiction, it's already here, and possibly happening tomorrow. Now, why should you care? Well, for one, ignorance is their fuel. If you see it, call it out. This matters, not just for your privacy, but as stated, right now is the time to push for a future where you're more than a data point. Humanity right now is building the most sophisticated surveillance system in history. And overall, the strategy seems pretty clear to me. Control the data, control the world. Alright, so I started to lose my voice in this one, but I hope it was okay. Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals, or you can use PayPal. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas. And yes, I do hope you have a good night.